Cliff and Mark come forward for the reading of the names.
These are the men that gave the supreme sacrifice in the First World War, 1914 to 1918. Thomas Bates, Arthur Boyles, Sidney Boyles, Reginald Brown, Frank Burge, Frank Dale, Harry Harvey, John King, John Marshall, Norman Marshall, John Parsons, George Pratt, George Purchase, Edgar Ralston, James Ralston, Harvey Reeve, Nelson Reeve, Walter Smith, Maury Stalker, Sidney Stovall, Thomas Taylor, Finley Thompson, Harry Todd, Bert Tompkins, and Robert Wallace.
And these who served gave their life in World War II. Leslie Allen, E. Beatty, Murray Beatty, J.C. Boyce, R. Boyce, H. Cannon, L. Churchill, Chas Gibson, E.B. Kellogg, W.J. Miller, K. Montgomery, H.C. Monto, T.H. Stewart, E.R. Sutton, E.A. Taylor, J.D. Taylor, W.C. Thomas, W. Todd, J.E. Tremblay, L. Tremblay, and J. Wood.
Okay, I'll start off with a bit of a quiz. When I was a kid, there was a poem. Well, there are lots of poems, but when I was a kid, there was a poem that I learned, and it was called Get Up and Bar the Door. Now, when I looked this poem up on the internet last night, it said that it was, the only version was a medieval poem, which makes me scared about my age. The poem that I remember is a poem that I think was written by Robert Service, and this poem that he wrote was a poem about a couple who were sitting in their cabin in the Yukon, and neither one of them would get up and close the door. They kept bickering back and forth about who was going to close it. It's your turn, no you do it, no you do it. And finally, they both froze to death because the door was never closed. Now, the medieval version, that's the one I remember. The medieval version is a little different. It's a couple who was sitting in the house. She was making pudding first, and then they both sat down. And he says, get up and bar the door. In other words, put the lock on it. She says, no, it's your turn. I was doing the pudding. You get up and bar the door. He says, no. It goes back and forth. They don't bar the door. And a few minutes later, in comes a couple of thieves. The thieves come in, but the deal is that the person who speaks first has to get up and bar the door. So in come these two thieves. Neither one of the husband or wife say anything. They just sit there. The thieves go into the kitchen. They eat the pudding. And that's just killing the two of them. Their fresh pudding is being eaten by these thieves. And then finally the one thief comes out, and the couple sitting there, the two thieves come out, and the couple sitting there, and the one guy pulls out a knife, and he says, I'm going to cut off the old man's beard. And they still don't say anything, which is, but anyways, finally the other thief says, and I'm going to kiss the old lady. At which point the husband finally speaks up and says, you're not going to eat my pudding and kiss my old lady. So he has to get up and bar the door. The point of that poem, of course, is the two of them don't do anything. The point of the poem that I remember, the Robert Service poem, which we can't find, so maybe it's just in my head, but anyway, maybe I wrote it, never wrote it down, I don't know. It's possible. The point is that neither one of them are doing anything. The point of that is that they are both reactive, they're not proactive. Neither one of them will get up and do anything. Neither one of them will get up and actually create a situation that is better for them. What they do is they react to each other, and the situation gets worse. It's related today to the Remembrance Day service because we live in a society where it is hoped that we will be reactive, not proactive. We live in a society where if we are reactive, then we can be controlled. If we are proactive, then we are the ones who are doing the controlling. We are told in our society who our enemies are. We're told how we as people should react. And if we react the way that we are told against the people that we are told are our enemies, then the rich get richer and many innocent lives are lost. Many innocent people die on both sides. We are told right now that our enemies are ISIS or ISIL or Daesh. Take your pick, depending who you're talking to. It's all the same group of people. According to statistics, that group is between 10,000 and 200,000 people strong. The USA, in the last couple of years, has spent, I'll keep the numbers in mind, 10,000 to 200,000. The USA has spent in the last few years $6 billion fighting this group of people. There's a group of people that's the same size as the city of Barrie. The statistics aren't out there too easy. They're not hard to find. They have done 10,000 airstrikes against this group of people. Start to put this together. 10,000 airstrikes against a group of 200,000. Now, I know the 200,000 is spread out. The fear factor that is there for us is the controlling interest. The fear factor is the one that tells us we should be worried about this group of people because they're going to take over the world. About 2 years ago now, the Innisbrook Baptist Church, you know, the one up here on Yonge Street, just past Midway Point, isn't it? Yeah. Their website was hacked. And by somebody who wrote on the website, I love ISIS. And this is what they used. And the point that was being made in that was that ISIS was invading our country because they hacked into the website at the Baptist Church. Interesting thing about that was, about the same time, our sign out the front here, I got a phone call from Bev Kell one day, and somebody had taken the letters off our sign out here and they had rearranged them into reading something that was probably shouldn't be on a church sign. I didn't go to the news and say the porn industry has invaded Canada. They already have. But I didn't make that point. The point of one of the Innisbrook Baptist Church was that some hacker simply wanted to have some fun and mess up their sign. It wasn't an invasion of Canadian space. It was simply somebody having fun. We can react in fear, or we can look at what's going on. And we need to, I think, look at what's going on if we're going to be proactive in our peace movement. Can you tell me if there's any connection? Does Canada have a vested interest in the war in the Middle East? Well, I can tell you in 2015, Canada sold $3 billion worth of armaments worldwide, and 2.7 of that billion, so $2.7 billion worth of arms were sold to Saudi Arabia. Do you think we have a vested interest in keeping the war going? Canada was the 13th largest arms dealer in the world. We have now raised to the 6th largest arms supplier in the world. We are the 2nd largest arms supplier to the Middle East. What does that tell you about the necessity for us to keep a war going in that area? And whether or not there's any connection, the Canadian Food Grains Bank was sold 2 years ago. 2 years ago? Anyway, one of the main owners of the Canadian Food Grains Bank, which is now called G3, one of the main owners of that is Saudi Arabia. So put all these pieces together, folks, and figure out what's going on in the world in which we live. We need to be a little more proactive than reactive in what's happening. We are told that there are enemies that we have to fight. We'll also hear the phrase periodically that, well, we'll lay down our weapons when they lay down their weapons. In other words, we're going to be reactive. We're told that the path to peace is through violence. You only have to look around and see what's going on. We're told that the path to negotiation is through violence. Check out what's going on in North Dakota right now. As soon as there's an objection, there's violence. And it's not limited just to there. If you were involved in the G8, you know that there was a lot of violence when the G8 was down here in Toronto. If you're a part of any of the demonstrations against fracking, you know there's lots of violence goes on there. Anywhere there's a demonstration, violence comes in pretty quickly in the form of armed guards. It comes in pretty quickly to settle the negotiation, which should be settled at the table. That's the way we're told that we need to settle disputes around the world is through violence. A passage of scripture that I read is a passage that I read often in funerals, John 14. It's a passage about, in my Father's house there are many rooms. At the end of it, it says that one particular phrase, and the phrase is, "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives do I give to you." The world's solution to getting peace is more violence. Christ says there's another way. There's a different way that we should be looking at how to get rid of violence or how to settle disputes in our world. Christ himself practiced nonviolence. When you look at the list of people who practice nonviolence, probably the most prominent one in our last few years is Martin Luther King Jr. He was a person who was reactive. He was opposed to what was happening to his black brothers and sisters. He was upset about it, and periodically he would preach against it. But by and large, he pretty much kept his head down. And then that woman, Rosa Parks, came along, and her and a few others, they refused to sit down quietly. And from that and some of his theology, he took some inspiration. He said, you know what? It's time to speak out, to be proactive, not reactive in what's happening in this world. And so you certainly know the history of Martin Luther King Jr. and what happened to him. Then there's an interesting scenario, and that was the Vietnam War. What happened in the Vietnam War was that when it first started, there was a huge reactive group of people. When the doors opened to sign up, there was a lineup. People wanted to be part of the war going on. They were going to save the country. They were going to stop communism from coming into the States, etc., etc. After a few years, the soldiers recognized that what they'd been told wasn't correct. What they'd been told wasn't the truth at all. And there was first a reaction to that. But then the soldiers came back and they started to be proactive. And out of that, we gathered the largest peace movement that we've ever seen. People saying, we're tired of it. More people committed suicide after the Vietnam War than they died during the Vietnam War because of the incredible impact that it had on the people. But those people said, we don't want to continue this war, no matter what our government tells us. We want to stop this war. One of the songs that I was going to use, we were talking about the other night, was a song that came out of that era called War. And some of you may remember this song. It goes, war, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. That's a proactive song that came out of the 60s saying, we're tired of war. We don't believe what's going on. We don't believe the necessity of war. And we look at the nonviolent leaders in our world because nonviolence has had a huge impact in our world. Look at some of the nonviolent leaders and what they have accomplished. There's Gandhi. There's Henry David Thoreau. He wrote an article, Civil Disobedience, which in many ways in the 1800s, in many ways it kicked off a lot of the civil disobedience, saying you don't have to just react to your government. You can be proactive and find out what's going on. Another nonviolent person, Bob Marley, John Lennon, Cesar Chavez, the United Farm Workers. And one that you might not have heard of, but Betty Williams. I don't know if anybody here knows Betty Williams. She was an Irish woman who, so she was if I remember the story correctly, she was at a friend's house and the kids were killed by the opposite side. And she said that's not acceptable. And so she had a huge impact on what happened in Ireland and the bringing to the end of the struggle between the two sides in Ireland. Her name is well known over there. She was a non-violent Irish peace activist. The Dalai Lama, the Tibetan Buddhist. Nelson Mandela, who spent most of his life in jail because of his belief in non-violence. Those were certainly people who were faced with very real, very violent situations where they could have been reactive, but they said, no, we're going to be proactive. We're going to stand up for nonviolence, and we're going to put an end to the violence in our world. Christianity, unfortunately, has aligned itself many times with consumerism, with commercialism, and that puts a real problem there because that's the way that our fears are leveraged. If we are terrified that we're going to lose our material possessions, that's great leverage if we're told that. So Christianity has to move out of that. Christianity has to step away from the materialism, step away from that and say, you know what, we are going to be proactive and trying to create peace within the world. It's time for us as Christians to be proactive. It's not particularly popular. If you stand up in a crowd and say, I am opposed to war, you'll be amazed at the reaction you will get. But we have to do it. We have to stand up and say, we don't want war in our world anymore. We actually do truly want peace on earth, and we follow the Prince of Peace. It's something that we have to be proactive and go out and tell people about that. Let us go back to the opening line. Let us get up and bar the door so that war doesn't enter our world anymore.